The Stranger in the Rain. The rain fell in heavy sheets over Santa Monica, drenching the streets in a silver haze. Streetlights flickered against the damp pavement, their reflections shimmering like ghostly apparitions. The rhythmic crash of ocean waves mingled with the steady patter of raindrops, creating a melancholic symphony that filled the night. Clara Evans pulled her thin hoodie tighter around her shoulders, her arms clutching the weight of a grocery bag filled with discounted items she had carefully picked out. The wind carried a biting chill, cutting through her worn-out jacket. The hour was late, and the streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional car splashing through puddles. Clara quickened her pace, her thoughts consumed by overdue bills and the dread of her early morning shift at the diner. Then she saw him. Slumped against a lamp-post near the pier, a man sat motionless, his head bowed, his drenched hair plastered to his forehead. His tailored suit, once pristine and expensive, was now ruined, streaked with mud, and something darker. Blood. The dim glow of the streetlight caught the sharp contours of his jawline, marred by a fresh cut still oozing crimson. Clara hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. He looked like he belonged in a Wall Street boardroom, not sprawled on the wet pavement like a forgotten soul. A ripple of unease crawled up her spine. Wealthy men didn't just end up like this. Had he been mugged? Attacked? Her gut told her to walk away, to let someone else deal with it. But something about his vulnerability, about the way his shoulders slumped in silent defeat, compelled her to step forward. "Hey," she called out, her voice hesitant but firm enough to cut through the rain. "Are you okay?" The man's head jerked up slightly, revealing piercing blue eyes, unfocused and glassy. He blinked sluggishly at her, as if struggling to process her presence. When he finally spoke, his voice was slurred, thick with exhaustion. They betrayed me." Clara frowned. "What?" He swayed slightly, gripping his side. Her gaze dropped to his hand, and her breath hitched. He was clutching an expensive watch, sleek, silver, with the initials EB elegantly etched onto its face. "Who betrayed you?" she asked, stepping closer. The man didn't respond. His lips parted as if to say something else, but his strength faltered, and he slumped further against the post. Clara exhaled sharply, torn between logic and instinct. "I should leave him here. Call an ambulance. Keep walking. This isn't my problem." But even as those thoughts flashed through her mind, she was already moving. "All right, let's get you out of this rain," she muttered, crouching down beside him. "Can you stand?" His head lolled slightly. No answer. Clara sighed, looping his arm over her shoulder and attempting to lift him. He was heavier than she expected, his dead weight dragging her down. Her muscles strained, but she managed to get him upright, staggering under his mass as she guided him forward. As they shuffled toward her small, weathered apartment building, Clara glanced over her shoulder. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw movement near the pier, a shadowed figure standing unnervingly still, cloaked in darkness. Her pulse quickened. Just the rain playing tricks on me. She shook off the feeling and picked up the pace. A strange guest. By the time she kicked open the door to her apartment, Clara was soaked to the bone. The man collapsed onto her couch with a groan, his head lolling to the side. She set down the groceries, pushing away the nagging voice in her head that reminded her how reckless this was. She didn't know this man. He could be dangerous. He could be a liar, a criminal. And yet, as she kneeled beside him and pulled out her battered first aid kit, all she saw was a man who had been hurt. She carefully dabbed at the cut on his temple with a damp cloth. His bruises were starting to bloom, across his cheekbone, down his collarbone. Whoever had done this hadn't just roughed him up. They'd meant to send a message. "Who did this to you?" she murmured. His face twitched, but he didn't answer. Instead, his head turned slightly, his lips parting to whisper the same fragmented words. "Betrayed, took everything." Clara chewed her lip. The watch slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft clink against the wooden floor. She picked it up, running her fingers over the cool metal. EB. The initials gleamed under the dim apartment light. Something about them nagged at her, like a half-forgotten memory lurking at the edges of her mind. She set the watch down on the coffee table and turned back to him. "Who are you?" she asked softly. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet hers. They were striking, not just in their color, but in the storm of emotions swirling within them. Pain, confusion, regret. Then, as quickly as they opened, they slid shut again, and he was out cold. Clara sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. What the hell have I just gotten myself into? A shadow lurking outside. As the hours ticked by, the storm outside refused to let up. Wind howled against the thin walls of her apartment, rattling the old windows. Clara sat curled up in the armchair across from the couch, her mind racing. She had nothing. No name, no explanation, no idea why this man had been left to bleed on the street. Her phone sat on the coffee table, untouched. She should call someone. The police, maybe. But something in her gut told her that getting the authorities involved could make things worse, for both of them. Her gaze flickered to the watch again. EB. Was he some rich guy who got tangled up with the wrong people? Or was there something darker behind his injuries? A flash of movement outside the window caught her attention. She stiffened. Heart pounding, she slowly got up and peered out through the curtain. A shadow stood just beyond the street lamp's reach, lingering on the sidewalk across from her apartment. Her breath hitched. The figure didn't move, didn't pace, didn't check a phone or walk away. They just stood there, watching. A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine. She snapped the curtains shut, stepping away from the window with trembling hands. Whoever this man on her couch was, she had just dragged herself into something far bigger than she ever could have imagined. And something told her, the nightmare was only just beginning. Shadows of the past. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of Clara's modest apartment, casting soft golden patterns on the walls. The air smelled of stale coffee and damp fabric, remnants of the storm that had raged outside through the night. Clara stood by the tiny stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal while glancing occasionally at the stranger still sprawled across her couch. His face, though bruised and pale, looked calmer now in the daylight. The rain had cleaned away some of the dried blood from his temple, leaving behind a jagged wound that had scabbed over. His tailored suit, still ruined, clung to him like a ghost of a forgotten life. Behind her, the soft sound of footsteps broke her focus. "Are we having oatmeal again?" Clara turned and smiled at her little sister Lily. The 8-year-old stood in the doorway, her wild bedhead framing her freckled face. "It's quick and easy, kiddo," Clara replied, scooping a portion into a chipped ceramic bowl. Lily wrinkled her nose but took her seat at the tiny kitchen table. Her gaze flickered toward the man on the couch, curiosity dancing in her bright green eyes. "Who's he?" Clara hesitated for a split second before responding. "A friend," she said quickly, brushing a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "He's not feeling well, so he's staying here for a little while. Eat your breakfast." Lily didn't look entirely convinced, but she picked up her spoon anyway. A man without a name. Later that morning, Clara sat on the armrest of the couch, watching the man's slow, even breathing. He stirred slightly, his brow furrowing as though caught in a distant dream. Then, finally, his eyes fluttered open. Blue, strikingly blue. Clara straightened, her fingers clenching together. "Hey," she said cautiously, "how are you feeling?" He blinked up at her, momentarily lost. His hand drifted to his head, wincing as his fingers brushed the wound on his temple. "Where?" His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. "You're safe," Clara reassured him. "I found you near the pier last night. Do you remember what happened?" A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He opened his mouth, then stopped, his brows knitted together in frustration. He trailed off. His fingers curled into the couch cushion. "I remember. An argument. There were voices. angry voices. And then, an accident. After that, nothing. Clara watched him closely, her mind racing. You don't remember your name. His lips parted, but there was only silence. A full 5 seconds passed before he finally muttered no. Clara exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. This just kept getting stranger. Well, I can't just keep calling you, hey you. So unless you remember something, I'll have to give you a name. He sighed, leaning back against the couch, his muscles visibly tense. Pick something, he muttered. Clara thought for a moment. Then her eyes flickered toward the silver watch still resting on the coffee table. The initials EB gleamed under the light. Noah, she said. I'll call you Noah. He glanced at her, the corner of his lips twitching slightly, almost a smile. Noah, he repeated. He tested the name on his tongue, like it was foreign yet oddly familiar. That works. The name Ethan Blake. The day pressed on, and Clara did her best to leave Noah alone so he could rest. She had a shift at the diner to cover, and she was already running late. The smell of coffee and fried food greeted her as she tied on her apron, slipping into the familiar rhythm of work. But as she poured refills and took orders, her mind kept drifting back to the man on her couch. Something about him nagged at her. She knew he was wealthy. His clothes, his watch, his posture all screamed high class. But why had someone beaten him and left him in the rain? As she wiped down the counter at the end of her shift, the sound of the diner's small television caught her attention. Breaking news, the anchor's voice rang out. Authorities are still searching for Ethan Blake, the billionaire CEO of Blake Tech, who disappeared 2 nights ago under mysterious circumstances. Police suspect foul play, but so far, no leads have been found. Clara's hands went still. She turned toward the screen, her heart pounding. The news segment displayed a photo, a crisp professional image of a man in a sharp black suit, his piercing blue eyes staring confidently at the camera. Clara felt her stomach drop. No. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. It's him. It's Noah. Noah is Ethan Blake, a past that can't be ignored. Clara barely remembered the walk home. Her father had sat at their kitchen table years ago, his hands trembling as he held a termination letter stamped with the Blake Tech logo. The company had acquired the place where he worked and shut it down without warning. It had destroyed their family. Her father had never recovered. The guilt, the depression, the endless cycle of overdue bills. It had all started because of Ethan Blake. And now, that same man was asleep on her couch. When Clara stepped into the apartment, she found him sitting up, looking more alert than before. He had changed into one of her late father's old shirts, the fabric slightly loose on his frame. She stopped in the doorway, gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. His eyes flickered to her, sensing something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked. Clara tossed the folded newspaper onto the coffee table. The front page bore his name, along with a grainy photo of him. His expression darkened as he leaned forward, staring at the headline. "Ethan Blake," she said coldly. "That's your name." He stiffened, his hands curling into fists. Don't lie to me," she cut him off. "I know who you are." For a long moment he said nothing. His gaze remained locked on the newspaper, his body rigid with tension. "I don't remember," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara scoffed, crossing her arms. "How convenient." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his damp hair. "I swear to you, I don't remember anything about being Ethan Blake. If that's who I am, then fine. But right now, I'm Noah. And I don't know why someone tried to kill me." Clara's jaw clenched. This was too much history, too much pain. But as much as she wanted to hate him, to scream at him for everything he had done to people like her family, she couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes. Whoever he had been before, this version of him was lost. And someone out there still wanted him dead. A visitor with questions. That evening, Clara sat on the floor, staring at the newspaper, her thoughts a tangled mess. A sharp knock at the door startled her. She exchanged a glance with Noah. "Expecting someone?" he asked. She shook her head. Slowly, she rose to her feet and crept toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit. He was holding a photo. Her pulse quickened. She could just make out the words he was speaking to her neighbor across the hall. "I'm looking for someone. His name is Ethan Blake." Clara's blood ran cold. Someone had come looking for him, and something told her they weren't here to help. The man in the suit. A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine as she pressed herself against the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the peephole, she could see the man more clearly now, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive black suit that barely showed any signs of rain from outside. His posture was stiff, calculated, and the photo he held was unmistakable. It was Ethan Blake. He's looking for him. For Noah. The realization sent a fresh wave of unease through her. Who was this man? A cop? A private investigator? Or worse, one of the people responsible for leaving Ethan to die in the storm? A voice from across the hall caught her attention. "I don't know, man," Clara's elderly neighbor, Mr. Davis, was saying, scratching his bald head. "I ain't seen him. But I don't get out much, so who knows?" The suited man studied him for a moment before slipping the photograph back into his coat pocket. "If you do, call this number." He handed Davis a business card. "It's urgent." Davis nodded, taking the card with a wrinkled hand. The suited man turned and started down the hallway. Clara didn't breathe. She didn't move. She waited until she heard the soft ding of the elevator doors closing before she finally stepped back, exhaling sharply. Someone's searching for him. Someone knows he's alive. She turned toward Noah, who had been sitting tensely on the couch, his fists clenched. "Someone was looking for you," she said quietly. His face darkened. "Who?" Clara shook her head, didn't say his name, but he had your picture. "Told my neighbor to call if he saw you." Noah exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. "Then they know I survived." His words sent a chill through her. If they knew he survived, they'd come back to finish the job. A dangerous choice. The air in the apartment felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Clara's mind whirled through possibilities. She should throw him out. Right now. He was dangerous. He wasn't some lost man with a forgotten past anymore. He was Ethan Blake, a billionaire CEO with enemies powerful enough to leave him for dead. Keeping him here was reckless. But then she thought of the way he had looked at her moments ago, lost, vulnerable, like a man clinging to the only thing that felt real. And against her better judgment, Clara made her decision. "You can stay," she said finally, her voice firm. "But we need to figure out what's going on. Fast." Noah looked at her in surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to give him a choice. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I can't just leave you to fend for yourself when someone is obviously trying to kill you." Noah's jaw clenched. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to argue, but then he nodded, his expression unreadable. "All right," he said. "Then let's start with what we know. A name that brings trouble." Clara sat at her laptop, typing furiously as Noah paced the room. Blake Tech, Ethan Blake. CEO. Missing. Her screen filled with news reports, headlines speculating on his disappearance. Blake Tech CEO, Vainais, Fabio Pele SBT. Voerd of DIRECTORs, AETSURES INVESTORS, THE Company, REMANs Stable. ETHAN BLAK last seen ATPRVAK EVENT, so or C is CLAM. She skimmed through the articles, her stomach twisting. Then she clicked on a business profile for Blake Tech. It listed the company's executives, including the vice president, Andrew Calloway, and Chief Operations Officer, Sophia Caldwell. The name Sophia Caldwell made Noah freeze. "That name," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "I remember it." Clara spun around in her chair. "You do?" Noah pressed his fingers against his temple, his expression tight with concentration. I don't know. I just feel something when I hear it. Like a warning." Clara turned back to her laptop, pulling up an article featuring Sophia. She was young, strikingly beautiful in an ice-cold, ruthless kind of way. Long, sharp cheekbones. Perfectly styled blonde hair. She stood beside Ethan in the photograph, her expression carefully neutral. Sophia Caldwell, one of Blake Tech's highest-ranking executives, had been rumored to be in line to take over the company if anything were to happen to Ethan Blake. Clara's fingers curled into a fist. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was an attempted murder. The call that changes everything. Noah was silent for a long time. His gaze was locked on Sophia's image, but his thoughts were elsewhere, deep in a fog of fragmented memories. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "If they wanted me dead, they won't stop looking for me." Clara didn't argue. She knew he was right. Her phone vibrated suddenly, the harsh sound shattering the tense silence. She jumped. Then, hesitantly, she picked it up. Unknown caller. She exchanged a glance with Noah before answering. "Hello?" A smooth, controlled female voice greeted her. "Clara Evans." Clara's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" A quiet chuckle. "I think you already know." Sophia Caldwell. Clara's blood ran cold. "You've been taking care of something that doesn't belong to you," Sophia continued, her tone polite, but sharp like a blade. "And I'd like it returned." Clara forced herself to sound unaffected. "I don't know what you're talking about." A pause. Then Sophia sighed. "Clara, I admire your courage. Truly, you see a wounded man in the street and take him in without hesitation. A kind heart, a noble soul. But you should know, kindness can be dangerous." Clara's nails dug into her palm. "Is that a threat?" "No," Sophia replied smoothly. "It's a promise. You're in over your head, dear. Give me Ethan, and this all goes away." Clara's mind raced. If she handed Noah over, she could wash her hands of all of this. She could walk away, pretend none of it had ever happened. But the image of her father flashed in her mind, the man who had lost everything because of Blake Tech, the man who had once told her to stand up for what's right, no matter what. She exhaled, her voice steady. "I don't think so." Sophia's tone sharpened. "You're making a mistake." "No," Clara shot back. "I think you did, when you didn't finish the job." Silence. Then, in the coldest voice Clara had ever heard, Sophia murmured, "I'll see you soon, Miss Evans." The line went dead. Clara stared at the phone in her shaking hands. Noah's voice was quiet, but firm. "She's coming for us." Clara swallowed hard, forcing down the fear. "Then we better be ready. The war begins." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the city's streets slick with rain. But Clara knew this was the calm before the real storm. Because somewhere out there, Sophia Caldwell was hunting them. And if they didn't fight back, they wouldn't survive. The storm breaks. The apartment felt colder than usual, even though the storm outside had passed. Clara sat on the worn-out couch, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The phone call from Sophia Caldwell still echoed in her mind, every syllable dripping with venom. "I'll see you soon, Miss Evans." She knew what that meant. Sophia wasn't just threatening. She was promising something. Retribution. Across the room, Noah, Ethan Blake, stood by the window, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the street below. His stance was tense, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him like an invisible force. "They'll come," he murmured. "And they won't be asking questions." Clara swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Noah turned toward her, his piercing blue eyes unreadable. "We get ahead of them." A plan born from desperation. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. Noah was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out before him. "What's all this?" she asked groggily. "Everything I could salvage from my past life," he said, gesturing at the documents. "Contracts, financial reports, encrypted messages. If I was really betrayed, the proof has to be somewhere in these." Clara rubbed her temples. "And if you don't find anything?" Noah's gaze darkened. "Then we go straight to the source." "The source," she echoed. "Sophia and Andrew." His voice was cold. "If they wanted me gone, they had a reason. I need to know what it is before they make their next move." Clara bit her lip. It was risky, insanely risky. But at this point, they were out of options. She sat down beside him and picked up one of the documents, scanning it carefully. The words blurred together at first, but then something caught her eye. A legal transfer agreement. She frowned, running her fingers over the page. "Noah," she started slowly, "this is a transfer of your shares in Blake Tech." Noah's head snapped up. "What?" She slid the paper toward him, pointing at the date. "It was drawn up 3 days before you disappeared," she said, "and it's signed by you." Noah's hands clenched into fists. "That's not possible." Clara looked at him. "Are you saying this is fake?" His jaw tightened. "I don't know. But if I signed this, I don't remember it." Clara exhaled. "So, they didn't just want you dead. They'd wanted your company first." Noah's eyes darkened. "Which means they needed me alive long enough to sign it." Silence hung between them. Then Clara asked the question neither of them wanted to face. What if you weren't supposed to survive?" Noah looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then I need to make sure they regret it." An unwelcome visitor. Clara was gathering the documents when a knock at the door made her freeze. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Her pulse spiked. She looked at Noah, whose entire body had gone rigid. Slowly, she stood, motioning for him to stay put. She approached the door carefully, peeking through the peephole. Her breath caught. A man in a gray suit stood outside. Not the same one from before, but someone just as dangerous looking. "Miss Evans," he called, his voice smooth. "I know you're in there." Her grip tightened on the doorknob. "We need to talk," the man continued. "I have an offer." Clara swallowed hard. She didn't want to let him in. But something told her if she ignored him, things would only get worse. Slowly, she unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to see his face. Sharp features, cold gray eyes, the kind of man who never smiled unless it meant something bad for someone else. He smirked slightly. "Ah, there you are." Clara didn't move. "Who are you?" "My name isn't important," he said, "but what I represent is. I work for Sophia Caldwell." Clara's blood ran cold. "I'll make this quick," the man continued. "My employer wants to resolve this situation peacefully. That means no violence, no police, no unwanted attention." He tilted his head slightly. "Give us Ethan Blake, and you'll never hear from us again." Clara stared at him. And then, slowly, she smiled. "That's interesting," she said, crossing her arms. "Because I have an offer too." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered with interest. "Oh." Clara leaned forward slightly. "How about you tell Sophia that if she wants Ethan, she can come get him herself?" For the first time, the man's smirk faltered. "I'd think carefully before making enemies you can't handle, Miss Evans." "I already have," she shot back. "Now get off my doorstep." The man's cold gray eyes locked onto hers for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. "As you wish." Then he turned and walked away. Clara slammed the door shut, her breath shaky. Noah was already standing. "Are you insane?" "They were never going to leave us alone," she said. "I just made sure they wouldn't try to take you in secret." Noah exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is getting worse by the second." Clara nodded, Then we need to hit first, going on the offensive. By evening, the plan was in motion. Clara sat behind the wheel of a borrowed car, parked a block away from Blake Tech headquarters. The glass building loomed over the city, glowing with cold, sterile lights. Noah was beside her, dressed in a stolen suit, his hair combed back. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "No," he admitted, "but it's our only shot." The plan was simple. Noah would walk through the front doors. Clara would hack into their system from the outside, downloading every file linked to Sophia and Andrew. Then, before security caught on, Noah would demand a meeting and force them to talk. It was insane, reckless, but it was the only way to find out the truth. Noah took a deep breath. Then, without another word, he stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. Clara's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, breaking into the company's security systems. A few minutes in, her heart nearly stopped. A private message thread popped up. It was from Sophia to Andrew. Her hands trembled as she read the words. "He's alive. Find him. Finish what we started." Clara's stomach twisted. They had never meant to just take over the company. They had meant to kill Ethan. And now, they were going to try again. The trap is set. Inside the building, Noah walked past the security desk without hesitation, his expression unreadable. The receptionist barely glanced at him before picking up a phone. He knew she was calling Sophia. Good, because this time, he wasn't walking into their trap. They were walking into his. Walking into the lion's den. Inside Blake Tech headquarters, Noah walked through the glass doors of Blake Tech, his footsteps deliberate, steady, a man returning to the empire stolen from him. The security guards stationed near the lobby straightened at the sight of him. Their gazes flickered with recognition, but they hesitated, confused. No one expected Ethan Blake to walk in through the front door. The sleek, modern interior of the headquarters felt cold, a place that once belonged to him, but had been stripped away. The massive Blake Tech logo on the wall gleamed under the fluorescent lights, mocking him. The receptionist, a young woman with dark-rimmed glasses, stared at him wide-eyed before scrambling for the phone. "Sir, you're supposed to be dead." Noah finished for her. Her throat bobbed. "I need to see Sophia Caldwell," he said, his voice calm, commanding. The woman hesitated. She's not taking any meetings today." Noah smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Tell her it's urgent." She swallowed hard and nodded, dialing. Noah turned slightly, scanning the security team watching him. 2 guards, both built like linebackers. They were waiting for orders. Good. Let them wait. Breaking in from the outside. A block away, Clara sat in the car, her fingers flying across the laptop keyboard. The dull glow from her screen illuminated her face in the darkened car. She was inside the system. Sophia and Andrew were arrogant. They thought they had everything under control. They hadn't even locked down their files. Clara's fingers moved swiftly, pulling encrypted messages, financial transactions, and private communications between Sophia and Andrew. She wasn't just looking for dirt. She was looking for proof. Then, she found it. An audio recording. Her heart pounded as she clicked play. First, static. Then voices. Andrew Calloway's sharp, irritated tone. "If we don't take care of this now, it's going to blow up in our faces." Sophia's voice, cold and amused. "Relax, Andrew. Ethan signed the documents. The board already sees him as reckless. The accident was the final touch. He'll be gone, and we'll control everything." Clara's blood turned to ice. They had set him up. They had taken his company. And then they had tried to kill him. She gritted her teeth, saving the files and sending backups to multiple locations. She wasn't losing this. Then her screen flickered with an alert. Security notification. All access restricted. Unauthorized breach detected. Her heart dropped. They had found her. She slammed the laptop shut. Damn it. She had to get to Noah. Fast. Sophia's office. A deadly reunion. Noah stood in the sleek, sterile conference room, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. A door clicked open. Sophia Caldwell entered, poised, immaculate in a white designer suit. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, and she carried herself with the elegance of someone who always won. Her expression remained neutral, but her sharp eyes betrayed something, calculation. "Well," she said smoothly, closing the door behind her. "I must say, Ethan, I wasn't expecting this." Noah smirked. "I figured." She tilted her head, crossing her arms. "You don't look dead." He took a slow step forward. "And you don't look surprised." She sighed dramatically, feigning sympathy. "Oh, Ethan, what did you expect? You walked away from your responsibilities. You made reckless decisions. You were ruining this company." His fists clenched. "So, you tried to kill me." Sophia's expression didn't change. "We did what was necessary." Something cold settled in his chest. They hadn't just betrayed him. They had never considered him a person. Just an obstacle. Noah exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You've made a mistake, Sophia." She arched an eyebrow. "Oh." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "You should have finished the job." A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed her face. Then, the door opened again. Andrew Calloway entered. Unlike Sophia, Andrew didn't hide his frustration. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, but there was something off about the way he carried himself, like a man whose plans were unraveling faster than he could control. He scowled at Noah. "Ethan." "Andrew." Noah greeted coolly. Andrew folded his arms. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you don't belong here." Noah laughed softly. "I don't belong here. This is my company, Andrew." Andrew's jaw tightened. "It was. You signed it away." Noah took a slow step forward. "Did I?" Andrew opened his mouth, then hesitated. Because he knew. He knew the documents had been forged. And now, so did Noah. The escape plan falls apart. Clara rushed through the parking garage, weaving between parked cars, her laptop bag clutched tightly. She needed to get inside. She needed to warn Noah. She reached the rear entrance, yanked the handle, locked. Damn it. Her mind raced. Then, footsteps. She spun around. The man from earlier, the one who had come to her apartment, stood a few feet away. His hands were in his pockets, but the look in his cold gray eyes sent a clear message. This wasn't a friendly conversation. "Miss Evans," he greeted smoothly. "You've been busy." Clara forced herself to stay calm. "Get out of my way." The man sighed, shaking his head. "I don't think so." Clara's grip on her bag tightened. "Let me go," she warned. His lips curled into a smirk. Then, he pulled a gun. Clara's breath caught. The barrel gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the parking garage. "I'd rather not make a mess," the man said, his voice casual. "So let's keep this simple. You're going to get in that car, and we're going to take a little drive." Clara's mind raced. Noah was inside, walking into a trap. She was outside, staring down the barrel of a gun. Everything was falling apart, and Sophia Caldwell was winning. A fight for survival. A gun to her head. Clara Evans stood frozen in the dimly lit parking garage, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The gun aimed at her chest gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, steady in the hands of the suited man who had followed her. She had known this was coming. She had known that Sophia Caldwell and Andrew Calloway wouldn't simply let her and Noah walk away. But knowing was different from facing it head-on. "You have one chance to do this the easy way," the man said smoothly. "Get in the car." Clara swallowed hard. "Or what?" she challenged, forcing her voice to remain steady. The man smiled coldly. "Or I put two in your gut and drag your body to Sophia anyway." Her pulse hammered. She could feel sweat beating at the base of her neck. Think, think, think. She darted a glance around the garage. There were no other people nearby. No one to call for help. She needed a way out. Fast. The man took a slow step forward. Clara moved. She threw her laptop bag at his face, twisting to the side as the gun fired. Bang! The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Clara didn't stop. She sprinted, her heart pounding, feet slamming against the concrete as she wove between parked cars. Behind her, she heard him curse. "Damn it! Get back here!" Another shot ripped through the air. Bang! A car window shattered, glass raining onto the ground just inches from her. She didn't stop running. Noah's last stand. Back inside Blake Tech's headquarters, Noah stood in front of Sophia and Andrew, his fists clenched. "You forged my signature," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You set me up." Andrew smirked. "Congratulations, genius. You finally figured it out." Noah's muscles tensed. "I built this company." Sophia cut him off with a soft chuckle. "You inherited it," she corrected. "And you ran it like a man playing with daddy's money." Noah's jaw clenched. "You were reckless," Sophia continued, stepping forward, her eyes gleaming. "You didn't care about numbers, about control, about power. You made decisions based on your heart, not logic." She tilted her head. "You were in the way." Noah exhaled slowly, rage simmering just beneath his skin. "Then why didn't you just fire me?" Sophia's lips curled. "We tried," she said simply, "but the board was loyal to you. They would have fought it." Andrew shrugged. "So we gave them something better." Noah's stomach twisted. "My death." Sophia's smile was razor sharp. "Your disappearance. A scandal. Something that made the company look unstable, so the board had no choice but to accept new leadership." Noah's fingers curled into fists. "And what?" he demanded. "You were going to find my body later. Make it look like an accident." Sophia sighed. "Ethan, darling." Her voice was almost mocking. "We weren't going to find anything." Cold realization slammed into him. They had never planned to make his death look accidental. They had planned to make sure no one ever found him. Noah's chest rose and fell rapidly. His whole life had been erased in a matter of days. They had stolen his company, his identity. They had left him to die in the storm. But he was still standing. And he wasn't going down again. Clara's counterattack. Clara ducked behind a row of parked cars, her breath ragged. The man hunting her, Sophia's enforcer, was still nearby. She could hear his footsteps. Click, click, click. Slow, methodical. "You're wasting your time," he called out. "We both know how this ends." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. Her hands were empty. No weapons, no way to fight. But her mind was sharp. She glanced to her left. A row of car alarms sat waiting. An idea formed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her key fob from the old car she'd borrowed earlier. Her only chance. She took a deep breath, then pressed the panic button. The car exploded with noise. The sudden blare of alarms filled the garage, echoing in every direction. The man cursed. "Damn it." Clara moved. She sprinted again, ducking low, weaving through the chaos. The man fired blindly. Bang! Bang! Bullets ricocheted off the metal of parked cars, but she was already gone. She had bought herself time. Now she just had to get to Noah. A boardroom on fire. Noah knew time was running out. Sophia and Andrew weren't afraid, which meant they had a backup plan. He needed leverage. Noah glanced toward the conference table, his eyes landing on the security intercom. A live mic. A direct audio feed to the entire building. To every employee. Every board member. Bingo. He took a step closer. Andrew frowned. "What are you?" Noah moved fast. He grabbed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen of Blake Tech, Noah's voice boomed through the entire headquarters. Sophia's eyes widened. Andrew's face turned white. Noah kept going. "You've all heard that I've been missing," he said, his voice clear and controlled. "And now you know why." He gestured at Sophia and Andrew. "These two tried to kill me. They stole the company. They forged my name." Chaos erupted. Voices filled the halls. Security guards turned toward each other. Employees stopped what they were doing. People were listening. Sophia lunged for him. But Noah was ready. He dodged, grabbed her arm, and twisted. She screamed as she slammed into the conference table. Andrew panicked, pulling something from his pocket. A knife. Noah barely dodged the first slash. But he wasn't fast enough for the second. The blade sliced across his arm, burning hot pain into his skin. He staggered, gritting his teeth. Andrew grinned. "Say goodnight, Blake." Then, the doors burst open. Clara, holding a stolen gun. She fired. A bullet hit Andrew's shoulder. He screamed, dropping the knife. Clara stood in the doorway, chest heaving, hands shaking. "I'm so tired of people pointing guns at me," she muttered. Noah laughed breathlessly. Then he grabbed Sophia, yanking her upright. "You wanted me dead," he whispered. "Then you should have done it right the first time." Her glare could have burned holes through steel. But she didn't speak. Because she knew. She had lost. The fall of Sophia Caldwell. Security stormed in. Within minutes, the truth was everywhere. Sophia and Andrew's corruption was exposed. The forged documents, the recorded conversations, the attempted murder. They were finished. The police arrived. Sophia was led away in handcuffs, her perfect hair still in place, her cold, dead stare locked onto Noah. "This isn't over," she hissed. Noah just smirked. "Oh, sweetheart," he said. "It really is." And with that, she was gone. A new beginning. Days later, Noah sat in his office, looking over his company, his life. Restored. Clara leaned against the desk. "So," she said, crossing her arms. "What now?" Noah smiled. "We rebuild," he said. "The right way." She studied him, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "You know," she said, "you're not so bad for a billionaire." Noah laughed. "And you're not so bad for a hacker." As the sun set over the city, they both knew. This was only the beginning. A future rebuild. 1 month later, a new dawn. Noah Blake stood in his newly reclaimed office, staring out at the city skyline. The late afternoon sun bathed the glass towers in a golden glow, reflecting a world that had almost erased him. For a while, he had been dead. Now he was back. Clara sat on the couch, flipping through a stack of legal documents, occasionally pushing her glasses up her nose. She looked different than when they first met. More confident, sharper, like someone who had learned to navigate dangerous waters and come out stronger. "How does it feel?" she asked without looking up. Noah turned from the window, tilting his head. "What?" She smirked. "Being the official CEO again." Noah exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. "Honestly, feels like a trap." Clara snorted. "Careful. Someone might think you actually hate being rich." Noah sat on the arm of the couch, shaking his head. "You know, before everything happened, I never really thought about this place," he admitted. "Blake Tech was just there. Something I had, something I ran because it was expected." His fingers drummed against his knee. "But now," his gaze darkened. "Now I realize how close I was to losing everything." Clara set the papers down, studying him. "You lost your name," she said softly. "But you found something else." Noah looked at her. "Yeah." She leaned forward. "You found out who your real enemies were." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And who my real allies are." Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she just shrugged. Lucky for you, I don't charge for loyalty. Noah smirked. Not yet. The fall of Sophia Caldwell. Sophia Caldwell was rotting in a cell. The trial had been swift. With Noah's return and Clara's leaked evidence, there was no way she could dodge the charges. Fraud, attempted murder, corporate corruption. Her empire had crumbled overnight. Andrew Calloway, her spineless right-hand man, had turned on her in exchange for a lesser sentence. Now, she was powerless, but she still had a voice. And when reporters asked her why she had done it, why she had betrayed her business partner, why she had tried to kill him, her answer had been chilling. No remorse, no apologies, just a simple, bitter truth. Ethan Blake was never meant to win. But he had. And that made her loss permanent. A new Blake Tech. Noah sat at the head of the boardroom table, a place he had once taken for granted. But now, as he looked at the men and women gathered before him, he saw things differently. These weren't just shareholders. They were people who had trusted him and been betrayed by others in his name. Blake Tech is changing, Noah said, his voice steady, powerful. The days of corruption and greed are over. He glanced at Clara, who sat at the far end of the table, casually spinning a pen between her fingers. She gave him a slight nod. They had planned this together. He continued. We will be restructuring immediately, he announced. All illegal dealings uncovered in Sophia and Andrew's files are being reported to authorities. Murmurs filled the room. Some of the older board members looked nervous. Good. It meant they knew they were guilty too. Any department found to have engaged in fraud will be audited and replaced. Noah went on. We will be hiring new leadership, people who actually understand that this company isn't just about profit. One of the board members, a heavy-set man with graying hair, cleared his throat. Ethan, let's be reasonable. Noah cut him off with a sharp smile. You can leave, he said simply. The man blinked. Noah leaned back. If you're here to defend Sophia's vision, then you're free to walk away. But if you stay, understand this. This is my company now, and we're doing things my way. Silence. Then, a slow ripple of nods. The old guard was crumbling, and a new future was rising in its place, a proposition for Clara. Later that evening, Noah and Clara stood outside the towering skyscraper, watching the city come to life as night fell. She crossed her arms. You really pissed off some of those board members today. Noah chuckled. Yeah, I think I have a talent for that. She smirked. You might. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. I have a proposition for you, he said. Clara arched an eyebrow. That sounds ominous. Noah exhaled. I need someone I trust. Clara blinked. Me. He nodded. I want you to come work for me, he said. Officially. Clara's lips parted slightly in shock. You want me, a hacker, to work at a tech company? Noah grinned. Let's call it cybersecurity. She shook her head, laughing softly. I don't know the first thing about running a legitimate business. Noah shrugged. Neither do I, apparently. Clara hesitated. For years, she had lived in survival mode, working dead-end jobs, running from one crisis to another. This was different. This was a future. What's the salary? She asked, smirking. Noah grinned. Enough that you'll never have to steal Wi-Fi again. Clara laughed. And just like that, she said yes. A final warning. Days later, a letter arrived at Blake Tech. It was addressed to Ethan Blake. Noah opened it in his office, his stomach twisting at the handwritten note inside. No return address, no name, just 3 simple words. This isn't over. Noah's grip on the paper tightened. Clara walked in, frowning. What's that? He slowly folded the letter. Nothing, he said, because deep down, he knew it wasn't really over. Enemies like Sophia Caldwell didn't disappear. They waited. They planned. And someday, they returned. But for now, Noah was ready. And this time, he wouldn't be taken by surprise. He would be waiting.